how is Tethos? Because I think this morning was 3. Let's see.
Oh, okay. We are now on time. So do you let's start?
Perfect. So yeah, now stop the jokes. Let's get a little bit serious. So thank you everybody to get into the show, connected into Twitch. Welcome everybody. So emelletv born to get some people from the OCaml recent community, and we invited them and we asked some silly questions, and sometimes we learn from them. In this case, I'm really happy for have the guest today because he helped me like 10 times to unblock me into many problems I have running in compilers, OPAM issues, like all sorts of things. So I'm very happy to have him. But before presenting him, let's present yourself, Gabriel.
Okay, so I'm Gabriel, more known as Fake Nichols on Twitter or social media, everywhere, etc. I work as a software co-founder, engineer, etc. on Vana, which is a platform for charging and sending invoices here in Brazil using the new central bank payment system. So that's basically me.
Nice. And I'm David. I'm from Barcelona. I work remote for Ahrefs. I'm half open source developer, half product person. So not product person, product engineer. So yeah, that's me. And let's introduce our guests.
Okay, so let's welcome Craig. Let's me put him on the. Okay, you are now on the show. Hello.
Hey, man.
Hi.
So yeah, I think it's time for your long or short intro. Up to you.
My pitch.
Your pitch.
Yeah, I'm not good at pitches, unfortunately. I'm Craig. I'm a software engineer. I work for Tarides and OCaml Labs. All of my work is open source, and I work on Irmin mostly, which is a complicated situation that we'll get into. Irmin is difficult to describe. It's a library database written in OCaml as part of the Mirage project. And I also maintain a bunch of other projects inside the GitHub Mirage / organization inside the set of projects that are maintained in Mirage.
Amazing. Today we see some familiar faces on the comments. So thank you very much to tune in 2 weeks from now. That's amazing. So Craig, how many times did you help people regularly?
I don't know. I think there's something immensely gratifying about the various forums that exist for small communities. We have discuss.ocaml and the Discord and these sorts of things. And there's a nice ego boost every time you're able to solve a problem for someone else. That's nice. And you also end up learning much faster than you would do otherwise. So I just really I enjoy teaching. I enjoy the way it sharpens the way I think about the kind of work that I try to do. And it really, there's no way to force yourself to actually understand something than to put some of your put some of your reputation on the line to actually understand it. Try to explain it.
Okay.
Yeah,
it sounds fair. So you have a perfect English, need to say, but you work for a French company. Do you remote? Yeah. Do you visit them? Do you understand them? Do you actually learn
do
French?
I understand them? I guess the better question is, do they understand me? And to that extent, I'm not really sure. I technically work for OCaml Labs right now. Technically employed by OCaml Labs, which is kind of like the faction of Tarides with an English accent kind of thing.
Okay.
So they're distinct distinct companies, but with very kind of friendly, a very light membrane between them, so that it's very possible to flow back and forth. And so I was living in Paris for a while, working at Tarides directly, And then the pandemic hit, and yeah, that was lots of fun. And then Brexit happened, and yeah, the combination of those two things was like it put a short end to my like exotic attempts to go and live in Paris for a little while, and so I ended up coming back to Cambridge, and that involved me transferring to OCaml Labs rather than Tarides, but like absolutely no aspect of my job changed in that process. I get paid in pounds rather than euros, and that's about it. So yeah, it was really convenient process there.
Perfect. So why there's no simple explanation about Tarides OCaml Labs?
Yeah, I think, you know, if you ask the right person, they would give you a simple explanation. And Neil's probably the person, like AVSM is probably the person to give you a simple explanation of it. OCaml Labs and Tarides stems out of like a collection of academics and people who are working in and around Cambridge some time ago. Thomas Gazigner, and Neil Madapedi and Casey, I'm going to try and pronounce his last name, Sivaramakrishnan, I think. Casey Sivaramakrishnan, the multi-core guy. And, you know, they were all working together, like building cool things, writing cool papers about unikernels, that sort of stuff. And then decided, like, yeah, but we actually all love our separate countries and like love spending time there. So Casey went back to India and is a professor there now. Thomas Gazigner went to Paris because he's French. Like French to his core is Thomas, and Neil stayed in Cambridge. But they continue to collaborate very closely and kind of still work in the same way. Like the work that we do now as part of those three companies is very much just like an extension of what was happening there. It just so happens it's in different places, and you know the boundaries become more and more blurred, and it becomes harder to describe as remote work becomes like more and more the norm, right? Like it's very working for a company is a very amorphous concept, right? Nowadays, right?
I think we started.
The third company is Segfault Systems, so they're the India lot.
Perfect. So we get very fast into distributed systems, but in terms of people now. So I distribute like group of friends that maintain OCaml in the background, that they are abroad. That's good. That's at least summarize like a little bit. So when you go to your relatives, your family, friends that doesn't know what the difference between a programming language and Photoshop is, how you explain that you work for the open, that you write things on a white or black, and then you get paid.
Maybe you overestimate how much my family actually understand about tech work. I think, I think so. The first, so it depends. Some of my people in my family are very technically capable and work, on hardware and that sort of stuff, and understand it all carefully. But like my grandmother, like at the very far opposite end, it's very hard to explain to her the difference between like IT support and being a developer. So like if you say working on computers, she thinks like the people who build PCs at PC World, or like go and look after printers and like do sysadmin jobs for offices and that sort of stuff. I mean, Eduardo says everyone fixes printers. I don't at all mean to be like demeaning of like people who do IT support. Like that's a super hard job that I would very much not want to do. But it's a very different job, right? Like I think the notion of describing programming to some people is really hard. Like when people seem to understand vaguely that there's a language involved, like people know the concept of a programming language and that there are different languages. But yeah, I would struggle to get across to kind of the least kind of technically literate people what exactly it is I do at all. I would sort of like try to describe a little bit. I type out sentences for the computer to understand. The sentences describe like a recipe. Like the recipe says, like, do this thing, but it's like a very like specific recipe. And yeah, I would just try and work from there basically.
Right, it's a big cake. Like the metaphor falls apart. That's a good one. So do you have like some friends that you used to work that they look up for you, some sort of like you went out of college with them and then they are working on something else, but they know you, that they think that you're a rock star kind of thing. Is that the case as well? Like there's some people who think that you're like, I don't know,
That's a great
singing in
question.
concerts and singing people in the face and all of this, or
Yeah, I don't know. I guess you'd have to ask them what they think. If they do think that, then they're wrong. Like that's an incorrect
Right.
approach to take to
sorry.
me. I mean, so my background is I went to university in Cambridge, and like so, if anyone were to look up to me, it would probably be the people that I met here. I supervise still at Cambridge, so I do some teaching. It's a bit difficult to describe what supervising is. It's kind of like being a TA, I guess, at like a regular university, like you're like a student level teacher.
Right.
Cambridge takes that quite seriously. And so I do some of that. And those people, like, the first time they meet me, they think I'm God and I understand everything.
Right.
And
Right. That's the cheering that I
that diminishes
imagine,
very, very quickly. I have to say, like the second time they meet me, they understand I know nothing, because they listened to me the first time and they went away and they were like, oh yeah, actually all that stuff you said was crap. None of it's true. And so yeah, that diminishes very rapidly.
Right. So Daniel, like, let's cross Craig for the next show, because his first impression is very good. His second impression is very bad. So just one show for him, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's a weird question, but let's start with the last one of the kind of like with the warm up. So who would you pick if you would need to hang out with a beer, whatever drink that you like to have from the entire history about computer science?
Wow. Yeah, this is a super difficult question. If I actually wanted to like take the question like in its context really seriously, I worry that the people that I would pick wouldn't talk to each other, and we would just end up like being really awkward introverts around our table.
Yeah. The only rule is that the conversation needs to flow. Like if there's like a 1 hour silence, you really, on that chance you really fail. So
yeah, like we need like an introversion, extroversion, and alcohol spectrum where I get to pick the amount of alcohol that I'm allowed to dose certain people with.
Right. Fair
get
context.
Conversation out of them. Yeah, I guess I would like to get Hindley, Damas, and Milner around a table. I guess this is like obviously a very generic response. Right. It'd be really interesting to get them to like talk about type theory and like converge on an understanding of it together. Like I believe it was like Hindley who originally described it, and Milner who later like redescribed it or rediscovered the same thing. It would be interesting to get them to talk.
Right.
Or to like understand how they thought about it. And I'd love to get them to like, I would love to speak to one of the original people who were involved in that. And am I mispronouncing Damas maybe? I would love to like mention some of the problems that we have today with those type systems, and like how far we are today, and what they think about, like, for instance, principality of type systems, like whether they would hold to the notion of types being principal as like a really big important thing. Like if you were to look at the OCaml type system right now, because like Jacques Garrigue went through like a process of, or the main maintainer of the OCaml type system went through a process of like being very, very hard on principality, and then like letting that lax over time as we realized more and more features actually require non-principality. So that'd be interesting. On a social level, Alan Turing,
right?
I'd love to speak to Alan Turing. Like Alan Turing died really young, and he has like a really sad history.
on the social level, right?
Yeah, so I mean, he has a really sad history basically, and was like persecuted by the British government, like an absolute genius, but he was gay, and at the time that was a really big problem. And I'd love to speak to him and just like speak to his opinion, like ask him about computer science, let him know that things are going to get better, and that sort of thing. You know, society will advance a little bit. That'll be fun.
That's a good pick for the social, for sure. Yeah, good. Yeah, that was a hard question. I know. I don't make it to anyone, for sure. So I just read today that you were 4th on your grade. I don't know if I'm explaining that properly.
Gosh, how did you discover that?
I mean, it's public knowledge. Like
Okay.
I'm not like I didn't went to the actual spreadsheet of the university. So
Wow. Yeah, it is public knowledge. You're right, but I'm impressed that you went to discover this public knowledge.
Right.
I mean, there's the nation of public knowledge. Like all of my work is public, but no one looks at it, right? Like every commit I make gets pushed to GitHub, and it's all public and open source. But like
that's a
most of the
good
time, it's
one.
just me looking at it.
Right. How's open source in that sense? Do you like from the more like serious note? How is working in the open and on the kind of like joking? How many times do you open a pull request, nobody reviews it, and you merge it? Like kind of like what's the
So I'm in like quite a good position with this. In the at OCaml Labs, we have enough people to make teams that make sense, even in the context of open source maintainership, right? So like we can have enough people on Irmin that there's always someone to proofread your pull request, even if that's happening out in the open, right? So perfect. I'll make a pull request, I'll assign someone, and we can have that regular workflow in the way that makes sense. And if someone else wants to fly by and make a comment, like that's totally their prerogative, right? They can do that, and we listen to them. And that happens occasionally, right? Very somewhat occasionally. There's some some hot features in various libraries that we know are like relied upon. They're somewhat sensitive. I maintain alkatest, which is like this very old-fashioned unit testing library in OCaml, and that one like has users who care about it in lots of different ways. And basically, like if you take the union of all the things that people care about, they care about the existing setup basically. And so any change you make will upset someone. Right. So yeah, it depends.
That's a good one. Yeah, cool. So you mentioned like the alco test where like you feel more like the pressure of the weight of the project. What are other projects that do have like a lot of attention that requires like more like not only like direction of the project, just like soft skills to understand different trade-offs and understand like even people and demotivations for them and all of these.
Yeah, I mean, so as a library developer in OCaml, you get a good like sense of how much your libraries are getting used when you try to release them, because there's a back pressure mechanism that when you release to the OPAM repository, the CI runs all of your reverse dependencies, like all the people who are depending on you, and if you break them, like if they fail to compile with your new release, then that's your responsibility to fix, basically,
right?
Or at least your responsibility, at least to correct the metadata, like your kind of ethical obligation to like worry a little bit more about that, right? You shouldn't just like break everyone and then like set upper bounds on everyone. That would be a mistake. So that's partly where I get the sense of like alkatest being a very like well cared for library, is that it's a real pain to release. Like if I break anything, like even the slightest thing in alkatest, then I know that's a day of like fixing rev deps on whenever I try to release it. Right. Irmin kind of similar. So Irmin has like a common core and then various backends that are sort of like plugins to that that actually that interact in very different ways. And the backend selects the type of developer that is interested in that sort of thing. So a while back, Thomas Leonard and a bunch of people were doing JavaScript, Irmin plus JavaScript stuff, and trying to get JavaScript stores into the browser and have them interact with servers and that sort of stuff. So there's a bunch of people who are like interested in that, and I know if I change that and there's a backwards compatibility problem, then I'm ruining someone's like to-do manager somewhere, and someone's gonna get really upset with me, like, oh yeah, I don't know what I'm gonna do tomorrow because I pulled the merge thing and it ruined my to-do manager. It's like, yeah, okay, fine.
Right, totally. So what's Irmin? What's the pitch for that?
The pitch for Irmin?
Yep.
Okay. So it depends how much you know about Git, basically. If you know what the internal model of Git is, I would basically say it's that as a library.
That I think I like what I know about Git. Like, of course, like the CLI and all of this. I know like how they store the objects and how they index point to those objects. And like that's, I think, I don't know if there's more than that.
Basically exactly that, right? The other way you could come at it is you could say it's a Merkle tree or a blockchain or something like that, right? It's a data structure that behaves in this way. You have a chain of commits, each of which has a hash that references a parent commit or a number of parent commits. Each of the commits points to a tree, and the tree points downwards, and then there are blobs at the bottom of the tree that correspond to data. And so in Git, this is like you have regular commits, and your tree represents your actual file tree on disk, and then your blobs correspond to files. So that's like Git maps onto that. Irmin just lets you do that with any types, basically, right? You specify what your blobs look like in your store, and like throw your hands up, and then Irmin handles the rest. What Irmin does is it allows you to specify where your backend is. So any store that has a content addressability property, which is to say you can add a value and get back a hash, then you can use it with Irmin, and that makes it very flexible. So there is a Git backend to Irmin, which is to say basically like the trivial implementation of Irmin is just like map onto Git's serialization format, right? So you can have an OCaml database where you like go like replace T and this key and this value, and you can actually see that happen on disk, and you can go like CD into it, you can go git log, and it'll contain that change, right? It's exactly what corresponds to that. But Git has some is obviously optimized for like a very different use case. It's optimized for developers and files. You can have backends that are optimized for way different numbers, and so we can have backends that are basically Tezos, right? Like all of the Tezos context corresponds to this Irmin backend. And this model, like the model that makes so much sense, can then we can like tune it to various performance parameters by like plugging in the backend that like satisfies those performance parameters.
That's the idea. Right. That's perfect. There's one question saying like, is Irmin like Datomic? I have no clue where Datomic.
Like there's a whole range of like high performance like Git-like databases. It might be one of those. Datomic says like it has it builds more like standard SQL abstractions on top of like it's on top of that model. So Atomic, just from googling it quickly now, if you have ACID transactions and joins, Irmin doesn't provide you with those. So Irmin has a much lower level interface onto the like heap that exists. Basically, you build trees in the same way that you have a tree data structure in your OCaml. You build Irmin trees, you operate on them, you write commits, and that's the level of the API at which Irmin offers you. It doesn't try to like provide a SQL-y type database on top of that where you can join across various things.
So like I imagine that because it's distributed, you would sometimes have like atomic problems. So you would have some sort of like collision, or well, now that we're talking Git, you definitely arrive to a conflict. Are there like different backends have different implementations to solve those conflicts, or it's the core that? Just no idea what I'm talking.
No, it's a good question. So so merge conflicts in the way they're resolved are something that comes down from the user rather than up from the backend in the way that Irmin is designed. So the user specifies their like the various types that they care about representing in the store model, and then they also pass like here's how I want you to reverse like solve merge conflicts over this file. So if you understand like a little bit more about the implementation of Git, the implementation of Git is like parameterized over a merge strategy. So if you do various Git merges, you can pass like and use this strategy instead. And those strategies get passed when you're trying to resolve a conflict. They get passed a left and a right, like two different like conflicting states, and also the common ancestor of those two states, right? And the merge strategy gets to do whatever it wants. Irmin is the same, right? You just pass it a function that says, given these three states, A, B, and old, pass me a new state or report a conflict, and then that's what you pass into the core, and it like instantiates that. It does like does its magic with that function.
Okay. Yeah. That makes total sense. Yeah. Not ready to do a pull request, but definitely understand the whole concept. Cool. So you mentioned distributed systems a lot of times, and we all know that you are passionate about. What are the hardest challenges aside from the like it is obviously distributed? So what are the other ones that you keep fighting and doesn't seem to have any easy solution?
I mean, so the stuff that I work on basically corresponds to storage in distributed systems. So how you implement the storage on each individual node in the system. And I don't know, I can use the blockchain terminology or not for how it works with Tezos, but you have some sort of shared state. So each of the nodes agrees on some sort of like, here's what the world state looks like. And that needs to get stored in a database on each node, right?
Right.
And that storage implementation is quite hard to get right.
Right.
One of the challenging aspects of the distributed nature of it is that when I'm considering a performance optimization on a various bit of store, or someone in my team's doing that, this isn't just me. I should make it clear. It's a team of people doing this.
Right.
The performance of this thing is basically a property of the network, right? Like it's not clear what any given performance adjustment will do until you actually push it out into a network and see how the various nodes interact at that level, right? We can do like performance benchmarking of individual, micro benchmarks of individual operations,
right?
But it's not clear how the network will actually behave until you push it out to the network and just like cross your fingers and like, okay, I hope that things interact properly here. I really don't know.
Right.
And that's really, really challenging because, it means that no matter what you do, there's always some amount of like clenching whenever it comes time to actually release things to the network, right? Like,
right. But that is not only for performing. Like you might have like some sort of like, yeah, you can test until certain level of quality, but then, yeah, I expect that at some point there's some things that can break as well. Is that quality as well like suffering from this uncertainty?
Yeah.
Or
I mean, so there's uncertainty aspect to the distributed system. There's a problem about uncertainty that is correlated across nodes, right? So if there are various problems that can happen at one node that propagate to problems happening on other nodes and propagate, suddenly
right,
that's propagating to losing money, right?
Right.
And that's a big problem, and that's the kind of thing that is really scary when that we have certain problems that can happen in our storage that basically correspond to one node goes down, or like one node uses slightly more disk space than is necessary, and these things are all like fine in the grand scheme of things. Like some people get annoyed, but it's fine. The really scary things, unfortunately, we haven't had any of these, but it's possible, is when we like conceptualize a bug and we're like, if that happens to that node, then it's going to happen to that one too.
Right.
Yeah, that's scary.
Right. Yeah. Definitely seems like, yeah, for sure. Like doing web, you don't have that for sure. Right. So one weird question. You mentioned as well Git, and I believe like many people in the world touch Git or even touch like any sort of like version system. Since Git doesn't sponsor you, what's the bad part of Git?
I mean,
what's the part that you would say, Linus, you did a good thing, but yeah, I'm not inviting you in my barbecue.
Yeah, it's a good question. Linus would not get invited to my barbecue. I can say that.
Right.
We
have Anil on the chat. Maybe we have Linus on the chat. So I would calm down, Craig.
So there's two different aspects of Git, right? There's the internal model, or the way that things are actually stored on disk, and then there's what the Git developers call the porcelain of Git, which is like the user experience, the CLI that's built on top of that, right? Like your Git checkout command, your Git switch, all that sort of stuff, right?
Right.
I think the storage model is definitely a good idea for something. Like it's onto something. There's something really interesting about it.
Right.
And like blockchain developers agree, right? There's clearly something obvious that like you can do with Merkle trees that don't make sense in other notions of data structure. And it's kind of an obvious thing that you would do as soon as you discover like the hash function has these properties. But then the porcelain, I'm not so keen about. I think there are like problems with like the usability of Git. But you have to give Git its credit, right? It won. Like in the end, Git was more successful than existing competing things at the time. Like Darks was around before Git, and has a model that I think makes a bit more sense with regard to version control, but it had big performance problems, right? Whereas Git, because it picked like a principled backend choice, of Merkle trees and that sort of thing. The performance, I don't say comes for free, but you're less likely to run into performance problems with a choice like Git. But that, as an advantage, brings you to the disadvantages as well. Like a chain of commits like leads you to focus more on individual states. Like if you have your chain of commits, when you're using Git, you're meant to be thinking about commits and like points on this state. Whereas I think how developers actually want to internalize their changes is like as a set of patches, or like as, I'm making this diff and I'm mothering this diff for a period of time until it gets merged, and then I leave it alone, right? And that's what the other version control systems try to capitalize on, right? Like and rather than thinking about commits, they think about stacks of patches or patches that I'm moving around and that sort of thing. It's weird in Git, right? Like so one of my like common workflows for Git, I'm committing a bunch of stuff locally, then I do a rebase right onto master. So I'm like, okay, I have this pretty history. I want this pretty history, but just there, like just give it to me there, so that I can make a PR. Fine. Yeah, okay. I guess we can get onto this, right? Like it's good if you're using emails and diffs and that sort of stuff. But if I do this rebase, like all my commit hashes change, right? Like I have a commit hash A, B, C, and now it's D, E, F. And so Git is conceptualizing these commits as two separately distinct objects. And that's just not how I think about them at all, right? Like it's not how I think about them. It's not how any developer thinks about these two changes as being like distinctly different. And so that shouldn't be like surfaced to me as a user of Git. And I think that's where like that sort of thing, like resolution of conflicts and rebasing is the kind of thing that the Git model like really isn't compatible with, but version control needs to support at some level. And yeah, I worry that that's the problem. But yeah,
totally fair. Totally fair.
Things like so Pijul. I'm not sure. I'm almost certainly not pronouncing that correctly. I think it's a Navajo word.
What's that?
Pijul, Pijul.
Right.
It's a like attempt at a more principled, in quotation marks, principled implementation of version control. That tries to have some sort of sound theory that underlies the way that things operate. And it uses patches rather than commits. It's like it's atomic operation, right? Like you're thinking about patches, and it's their argument for that is that thinking about patches makes sense, and it corresponds to the way that developers think about their code. And yeah, I think that's cool. Like that they take the like darks approach, but just try to make it performant, like using all of the previous darks developers who realized the performance problems of that. They were working on Pijul and like try to like apply that knowledge. I think there's definitely there's definitely space for a replacement tool to Git that handles the way that people actually want to think about code rather than the way that Git wants you to think about code.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, totally. I don't think you would convince anyone that conflicts is a thing that you came up with, right? Yeah, it's something that they did you for sure.
I think so my frustration is that Git doesn't have like a first class notion of conflicts. Like if I do a rebase and I have a conflict locally, like I'm screwed until I resolve that, right? Like I have no access to like Git just forces me to resolve this now, like do it now. And before I can even continue with like storing this on disk or like allowing you to stash things or make commits or push to anywhere, you have to resolve this now. And that means that you can end up in situations where like for an extended period of time while you're trying to do like a difficult conflict resolution, the tool is just locked up on you. Like it's saying, I don't understand how to represent this thing in a first class way right now. You have to fix it and write it in the way that makes sense to me so that I can do that. Whereas I think Pijul does have like this notion, right? Like when you're doing rebasing or like an equivalent of rebasing, like trying to resolve a conflict.
You can store that, right? You can.
Yeah, the data structure can represent conflicts and resolve them later. It can take conflicts and store them like internally in this like malformed state, and then it understands later that okay, I'll think about this when we're actually done. And Git is obviously missing something like that.
Right. Totally. Yeah. So you learn OCaml on university, and I believe you have been writing OCaml nonstop since then. Why? Not saying that you should not. Just saying like what's the reason behind it?
I'm welcome. I'm welcome. I wasn't expecting to come onto an ML podcast and be told that I'm not doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at Cambridge, they use like at the time it was ML, standard ML, as like a hazing exercise, basically. Like you take all these developers that have a mixed amount of initial interest, but some of them have done lots of C++ and they're competitive programmers. Some of them have done nothing. Some of them have done some Python or some Java, but almost none of them have done any ML. And you can get them to like understand ML, and it levels the playing field, sets up how like the course wants you to think about programming, which is kind of in an abstract sense. And it kind of builds onto the like semantics and type systems and that sort of stuff that happens later. So I think kind of it's a teaching contrivance that it ends up being the first thing that you learn, but it kind of stuck with me. It's obviously a cliche to say that like that's the way I think about code now. I think there's like I'm a big subscriber to linguistic determinism as a way to explain why I actually end up in OCaml. Like this is a thing that linguists believe, is that like if you speak a language for long enough, or some linguists believe this, if you speak a language for long enough, it frames the way that you think about like various things that are not related to language.
Yep.
And this obviously, like to me, this obviously applies to computer languages as well, right? Like it's so clear that after so much time of like being frustrated with problems, and then the problem is only solved once I put it into the way that OCaml wants it to consider it to be solved. Like that's I'm like Pavlov's dog, right? Like I'm it's teaching me to think about problems being solved only once OCaml is happy that I've solved them. And so of course I feel like I'm happy with OCaml right now. I guess if you want like a less meta answer, I really like the module system. I really like inference. I think functors are great. And get a bit of bad rep. Like you can't like find functors in many other like or analogous things of functors in many other languages. So it's like a unique point in the space is OCaml.
That's true. And what's the undervalued feature of OCaml?
Undervalued feature.
And don't say objects.
I was going to say objects. I was totally going to say objects.
No,
I'm not allowed to argue for objects. Okay, I could totally
you can advocate for whatever you want.
Objects are great. Let me tell you.
Mute him.
Okay. Right. I'm still going to go for objects. So not objects with encapsulated state. But, so if you think about sums and products in OCaml, you have your sum is your standard variant type, and your product is like tuple, right? Hang on. Sum is your standard variant type and or tuple or record, right? Records are nominal. Let's pick variants and records. And then OCaml also offers polymorphic variants, right? Which are like variants, but they're structural, right? Like I can just call a polymorphic variant type out of the void and it exists. I don't have to ever define it. And all of the polymorphic variants are equal to each other. Totally fine. This is called like the structurally typed sum. Okay. But if you think about it, there's an obvious case for a structurally typed product, right? Like a really, really clear case for that. Like everywhere where it makes sense to have a structurally typed sum,
right?
Like for instance, if you're returning from a function and you don't want the heavyweight nature of having returned like a type that you then have to reference, and you just want to return like a polymorphic variant that you can move around, makes total sense to have a product there instead. And I think there are like really good cases for, so one of my really good cases for objects where you're just using object as a structurally typed product with a row variable is if you have a library that needs to pass config in lots of places. So like Alcatest is one of them, but this happens in a lot of cases where you have a binary at the top level. The binary takes a whole bunch of config that corresponds to like flags that are passed, right? And then you pass this through a library that like has some sort of tree structure, and then like this config has to be dissipated throughout, right? You end up in a nasty case, like just doing this by default. What happens is the library grows over time. You pass more and more flags to lots of things, and your functions start looking really, really nasty. And in OCaml, you pass lots of named arguments to things. To say, okay, here's this Boolean flag that corresponds to this thing having been passed, and like all of the types everywhere correspond to what like every individual function needs to know about this thing, and it all exists in the code. It's all noise. It's all rubbish. Like this stuff just exists at the top level once and never changes, so I don't ever have to worry about this noise.
Totally.
and then pack it into an object, and then the types still tell you, like, if I have a function like a pretty printer that requires to know whether or not I'm in verbose mode, I pass config, I go config / like, am I in verbose mode, and the type is inferred, and all the magic happens, but there's no noise. Like,
I totally saw. Yeah, I've been in this situation, like where you have like a one record that it's just static, it's huge, grows, and then at some point, like the entire code base knows like those flags. So yeah, and totally, and one little change is, yeah, the compiler helps, but still, you will need to work through hundreds of files to change one rename. So yeah,
I mean, Sean makes the good point of like error messages, and this is true for polymorphic variants as well. Like, if you use polymorphic variants too much, your error messages get really nasty. All the aliases start getting exposed, and that's a problem. And you know, some libraries that are written by people that I really respect use records for config passing. June does this. So June like builds lots of big records that it passes around instead, and then you get some better type errors doing that way.
Definitely,
it's a little bit harder to maintain. Like, if you want to rename something, you're doing that everywhere. That's the way it is.
For sure. And Sean, we're not recommending TypeScript here. It's an allowed word, but on the edge, I would say extended records from Elm. That would be my pick. We could have like the same extendability for records in Elm as objects in OCaml. That would be like a dream come true. So
I think like a lot of records and variants make more sense if you just have good refactoring tools for them.
Right.
Like, it's fine to have all this. So people say that like OCaml is a really good refactoring language, right? Because your types, you start a refactor and then you're done once the build system says okay, right? Great, that's true. That's like completely true. I think you know, basically, if I attempt a really big refactor that corresponds to a type change in OCaml, I'm happy once it's done and I make a pull request.
Right.
And there have been times when I like completely forgot to run the unit tests, and there's like this small thing that happened, and I was like, I didn't even run the test locally there because I was so convinced it was just going to work, and there's this little problem. Fine, whatever, I'll fix that.
Right.
But if you make a huge patch in OCaml today, at least, you have to write that whole patch, right? Like there aren't really, you know, it's all very well to say I can freely write plus 2000 minus 2000 line PRs, but you still have to actually write all those 2000 lines in your like Emacs buffer or your Vim buffer or whatever.
Right.
Like, what I want is like all that freedom to come with the advantage of the fact that the compiler knows what to do. Just like get Merlin to do this rename or to like add, like factor out this this concept, and ta-da, I'll be done, right? Like, that's when OCaml's like refactorability prospect will make much more sense, is when like I no longer have to go through the grunt work. I'm no longer the blue collar worker that actually has to make that change everywhere.
Right. So you advocate more for like code modifications, right? Merlin could be way more smart, 10 times more smart, saying rename this, and it can go to any degree of the type and update any sort of like instance of the function or any sort of type and resolve that for you.
It's obviously a really hard problem, right? Because OCaml is very flexible, or Rescript or whatever we're talking about right now.
Right.
It's very flexible in terms of what you can do, particularly with the module system. You can do lots of like weird things where it makes it difficult for refactoring tools to tell what actually needs to be touched whenever you make a change, right? So I can do so take a module, include it, and then refer to something that I've included from that thing. It's not clear just examining the source code whether I'm referencing something that I've included or up there.
Yep.
And if I do, if I try to rename a like a named record or like a named argument, who knows like where that actually corresponds to, right? It's a difficult problem. And I don't think the people who work on Merlin are stupid, like far from it. They're very clever people. And they're just struggling with like the difficulty of implementing these tools in OCaml in a language that offers that much flexibility.
Totally.
But yeah, totally. Like things like I have a pair and I want to make it a record right now, right? I have a pair and I want to be able to name the first and second component right now. Like that's a pretty much entirely type directed process, right? Or at least it feels like it should be. Maybe there's some like unsoundness problems, like it's not possible to do it in every case, but in most cases it's probably possible, right? I just want to name them. I shouldn't have to do that. I should be able to tell Merlin to do that for me.
That's a good wish, for sure. That's definitely a good wish. You mentioned Rescript. assuming that you don't like follow the kind of like news drama, whatever you want to call it, from the outside, what's your opinion about Reason? Like the beginning, the initial idea of we're gonna make a syntax that looks more like noisy for OCaml people, but completely friendly to JavaScript people.
Yeah. Okay. I'll try and be concise.
You can badge anyone.
I think basically any change of syntax is going to upset anyone, even if the previous state
For sure.
was really bad, right? Like syntax is just a really contentious point, and a lot of people respond really poorly to it immediately, just because they've like their brain has melted around the existing syntax.
Definitely.
So I would try and take like a higher view of like those sorts of changes, like so dropping the in, for instance, like yeah, whatever. I would get used to that. I think changing syntax can become a problem when you change it to the point where it no longer indicates the correct semantics.
Right, when you lose the semantics,
more confusing about what's actually happening. So one of the things that's quite nice about OCaml syntax is like really lightweight function application that you lose in Rescript, right? Like not having parens to correspond to function application, because then you understand how currying works like immediately, or like it's really natural to understand how currying works.
Right.
I think like the OCaml syntax makes it slightly clearer that expressions are a recursive construct. It's clearer to understand like when you have lets x equal pattern in expression as an overall expression. I think it's slightly more obvious from reading the code that that's what's going on, as opposed to like the curly braces semicolon idea. It makes it a bit less clear, in my opinion, or at least that's just the way I've read it. Like Rescript obviously tries to borrow like syntax from languages that have a notion of statement, like C and JavaScript have like notions of expression and statement, whereas OCaml only has a notion of expression.
Right.
And I think that makes the syntax a little bit jarring. But like if it helps bring like a huge community to like a huge JavaScript community and makes it easier for them to like get in on it, like sure, like that's way more important than anything that I have to say about like individual like concerns about the way the syntax works.
For sure. Do you think that the OCaml community is small? How sorry, no, let me rephrase that. How would you describe the OCaml community? And sorry for giving the question very biased, but yeah.
Ambitious.
Ambitious.
Successful.
Right.
I don't know.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
That's a great.
Oof. Okay, Gabriel, you got the tweet now.
I think it's an ambition that's founded in like some real hope. Like OCaml is a language that's been around for a long period of time, which I guess like when you compare it to other languages that have been around for that period of time, none of them have or like many of them are not compelling in like achieving rapid growth in the next few years. Whereas OCaml has a language that like really could like grow very, very like incrementally over time and then spike. Like it's very possible for that to happen. I think some cool language features that are coming, multi-core OCaml. I think effects will be an absolute game changer. I think as soon as we get any kind of ad hoc polymorphism in the language, like the modular implicits, that sort of stuff. These sort of things that are being worked on because there's still research interest in OCaml. Like it's a good research language. It brings these cool features in that could be complete game changers for like how feasible OCaml is as a language. And yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm ambitious for the future of OCaml.
Right. So you not only invest like all your savings in Tezos, you are investing all your time in OCaml. Which one of these two bets you would put more effort?
I think Tezos makes sense as an OCaml project. Tezos kind of in its design attempts to be agnostic to language implementation, right? You have the protocol, so there's a protocol that runs on all of the nodes. Then there's a shell that can be implemented in any language, and it happens that it's implemented in OCaml currently, but there's a Rust competing implementation, and that sort of stuff.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing that like blockchains and big financial products need to have, is that kind of flexibility, and like the ability to suffer big hits. But you know, if Tezos were to switch to Rust tomorrow, I'd be really sad about that. Like I like OCaml, and I think I think the things that are coming to OCaml very, very soon will make things that were not previously possible very cool and fun to do.
Right.
And that's super, super exciting. I'm very excited about that.
For sure. I think we all like are in a sense, even though we are more in the kind of like front end, or at least Gabriel and I were more in the front end world. We do touch backend sometimes, or at least I touch OCaml sometimes on the backend. So
did you see so at the OCaml workshop last week, Thomas Leonard's experiences with effects talk?
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
I got that one.
That's a really, really good talk. And like to the people who are listening, like if you haven't seen that, go watch that now. That's a really good talk. Or maybe go watch that after we finished.
Yeah, can you just
yeah, like that sort of thing will change front end and back end, and you know, if you can, I guess the problem with like trying to compile to JavaScript is that it's not a supported feature in JavaScript at the moment. But once JavaScript has JavaScript runtimes have support for the kind of control flow constructs like that, that's a game changer. That's a real game changer. Like no longer having to think about non-blocking and blocking as a type level construct that permeates noise throughout all of your code, like this like async await becoming noise everywhere, or like in my life LWT and like bind operations and maps like becoming a problem everywhere. Whenever I'm writing code in those sorts of code base, like at least 40% of my mental effort is just like permanently devoted to thinking about making the types match with regard to IO. Like I'll not have to do that when effects are in the language, and that's really fun. Like that's gonna like make me so much more efficient.
Yeah, I'm scared that the React team, I don't know, you might be like not familiar at all, but the React team has been fighting for, I believe, almost 3 years. They did implement the same concept of effects through exceptions. So they kind of like hack the thread when the only way to stop an execution is like throwing and then like doing JavaScript magic. So you kind of have the effects, but yeah, I'm scared that they spend much thinking about that model, and they went back and forth. So like the entire suspense thing, it's going to be released soon. This is what they message. So it's definitely, I wouldn't say that the front end people would not benefit from that if we could translate it, because the runtime is possible for sure. Just effects, of course, not multi-core. So, but yeah.
I mean, yeah, you would know way more about this than me, I guess. I get interested in React when the hooks API comes in. So when was that? A few years ago now. I think the hooks API is like to a functional programmer makes lots and lots of sense. And that's kind of effects. Like that's bringing a lot of functional programming type notions, interpreters and monads and this sort of thing. They're just hiding underneath the implementation of hooks, and it makes hooks really fun to program in. So yeah, I have faith in the React developers, the React core developers.
Yeah, when's the last time that you touched like a front end?
Yeah, so I a while back got frustrated with like how hard operators are to Google in OCaml, and I guess you know what I'm referring to now. I'm thinking about like a little like widget thing that I wrote for looking up OCaml operators, and that was fun. That was my first like foray into using hooks properly. So that the implementation behind that uses a bunch of hooks. So you go in and it just gives you a search bar. You type in some operator and it expands that out to an explanation of what the operator does. Right. So like pipe operator, blah. This thing is a reverse application operator. It does this, and you have this little code snippet, whatever. It was just a nice way to package in some teaching that I wanted to do, like for new users of OCaml, and also learn some cool front end stuff. And yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that. That was really good.
Really good. Yeah, I'm gonna share it because I do remember looking up that up. That's cool. But yeah, if now we went back to like OCaml distributed systems, but you mentioned something like very vague, which is that OCaml is very good for blockchain, or at least for how Tethos is distributed with the protocol. Why would you say that why Tethos choose OCaml, like from this historical point of view rather than the technical?
Yeah, I would. There's an interesting connection between blockchain and functional programmers all over the place, I guess.
Right.
And if you're going to have a blockchain come up in France, or like where lots of developers exist in France, then OCaml is just a natural choice. Like it makes so much sense. I think the reason that it's been successful, aside from that, is that OCaml happens to make sense as well. Like you were going to pick a functional programming language, you were going to pick OCaml. Just so happens that it's good. You can actually implement like the protocol exchange mechanism and the heart of the protocol. Like the core of the protocol is currently written using GADTs and that sort of stuff. That's Jan Rigistianus' work. I guess like from a social perspective, it attracts lots of academics and people who like to think about formal verification and that sort of stuff. Like it brings in lots of people that you probably wouldn't have access to if you were writing in JavaScript, say, or people that wouldn't be as compelled to join the ecosystem. And I guess Tezos kind of feeds on that ready source of French academics who are looking to go into industry and like OCaml.
That's very great. Yeah, because what I see, like I'm a bit of a blockchain user, right? Ethereum, etc. And I see they picking more like Go or Rust or even Haskell, but not always OCaml. Like only Tezos and Mina shows that, and look at like kind of odd decision. But being also an OCaml user, etc., for me makes more sense than Haskell, for instance. So I would definitely like to see more of OCaml in blockchain. And I wonder why not. It's not happening.
Yeah, I mean, when OCaml and Tezos take over, then obviously we'll be the 100%. You see these old graphs of like pie charts going over time as to what like Internet Explorer expanding and like the people using internet browsers over time. Like the blockchains over time will be like, Ethereum's growing, Tezos, and then and it'll be the same for OCaml. You'll just see. C++ will like shrink to nothing, and OCaml will be everywhere.
Right.
We'll make it then Camel. Okay, so do you have any other questions? We have another question here from the chat. Let me see where people. Okay, here it is. The next survey, the classic one, right?
Oof.
The correct response to this question is VS Code, unfortunately. I use Emacs at the moment, but I think fortunately soon it will not matter. I hope they're like the good people who are working on OCaml LSP, the language server, are like doing great work, and that's currently the best way to consume OCaml, and it makes it the same or like basically the same in whatever text editor you have. Like it corresponds to how good the LSP support is in your various text editors. So I use Emacs plus OCaml LSP, but the experience is OCaml LSP, right? Like the actual experience of interacting with it is all being provided by Merlin and the good people who are working on that, plus the LSP wrapper. So that's a really good experience, right? Because like ergonomics shouldn't need to correspond to like how well supported your language is. These two things should be orthogonal. Unfortunately, they're becoming orthogonal because I need good Vim key bindings. I need to be able to like tinker with my text editor. So I'm glad that doesn't mean that I also have to sacrifice doing things like renaming and that sort of thing. So
totally. Did you follow the Reverie? So it's the project. It's the OnIBeam 2, I believe. Where like there's the engine with Reverie. Would you think that OCaml or in this case like Reason does have a space for the desktop area, or it just like doesn't fit?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think so. I'm an Emacs user, and I think Emacs benefits a lot from Lisp. And the way that Lisp works as an interpreter, untyped, easy to script in, I think those are really good advantages. And there's a nice coherence to the fact that the thing is actually implemented in that. Like you can imagine having like an Emacs implemented in C++ that had a Lisp interpreter built into it, or that sort of thing, right? But I think it's nice to have actual correspondence between those two things. The problem with that is also obviously that Emacs is really slow, right? Like it makes that trade-off and decides to be really, really slow in order to have this as an advantage. So I guess there's an obvious space for, or to me at least, there's an obvious space for lots of different good options to exist. Like there doesn't need to be a best text editor, and some really good text editors will be very, very fast and will be written in languages that compile properly and aren't interpreted and aren't Lisp. And OCaml has
right.
OCaml has a huge scope to be one of those, right? Like
That's
if
true.
you're going down that route, then there's no reason not to pick OCaml. Like why would you pick why would you not pick OCaml? Basically, like it's as good as any other choice.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Someone on the chat asked how to get hired as an OCaml developer, which I believe is like, how easy is to get a job? Knowing OCaml and not knowing OCaml, how's the experience? Did you introduce anyone from any sort of like other community or language into OCaml?
I guess the nature of OCaml is that companies that use OCaml tend to use it a lot. And so if you join as an OCaml developer, you're probably joining lots of OCaml developers, I would guess.
Right.
On average, that's probably the case, I would guess. And those companies are used to hiring non-OCaml developers. Otherwise, they would have shrunk and died by now. Like companies who use OCaml or not need to fix the onboarding process of like, how do we onboard people who are not used to programming in OCaml? And at least I can speak for myself at Tarides and OCaml Labs. I think we're pretty good at that. We often hire people who have very little experience writing OCaml specifically. Maybe they've done some Haskell, maybe they've done no FP at all, maybe they've done some Rust. And I think very good programmers tend to be quite portable. Like if you're like a very, very good C++ developer, then odds are pretty good. Like provided you can stomach uniform memory representation and that sort of thing in OCaml, then
you probably can, yeah.
Yeah, you probably be a good OCaml developer. And we have the resources to teach you to be good. And I suspect the same would be true of Jane Street and those sorts of like big companies. Like I'm pretty sure they just look for like engineering competency, like independently of understanding OCaml, and potentially some level of like, to what extent are you mentally compatible with this sort of code that we want to write? If you're going to be writing OCaml like it's C all the time, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
But
of course, yeah. There's the mental gymnastics always, but sure, yeah.
Yeah.
How can we apply to Tarides? That's a very good question. Obviously, very good question. Send us an email. Tarides.com/company. I think there's a link there from there. We're currently trying to hire a few people. The multi-core team is looking for someone, or maybe 2 people. I'm not sure. The multi-core team hires everywhere. So if you're interested in working at multi-core, that's a cool thing. We do compilery stuff. We do platform stuff. Like basically, we have fingers in all of the platform pies. Like we've got Gene developers and OCaml developers and OPAM developers and all these sorts of things. And then, or you can work with me if you really want to suffer on the Irmin side. Have to interact with me on a regular basis. Then you're welcome to come to Irmin and kind of low-level systemsy stuff, or do Mirage. So if you're a real systems, I guess there's a system spectrum. Like platform, compiler, Irmin, Mirage. So like place yourself on that spectrum, decide roughly, and then apply. Come do that.
Right. Is that a good experience if I want to apply to, I don't know, Mirage, or even I'm a hardcore one and I want to, support Alcotest myself. Is that a good kind of experience? Go through pull requests and learn from them. Are there good resources? While just watching or just reading code for OCaml, or would you say it's better to have an onboarding kind of a buddy and join a big OCaml shop?
That's a really interesting question. I guess it depends on the kind of person you are. Some people are going to thrive in an environment where they've got lots of mentors around them, and some people will thrive in an environment that has no affordance except GitHub.com, and you have to go and interact with people like that. I have accepted candidates from both pools. I think there's lots of scope for people to be successful in both contexts, and it's a personality thing.
Right.
Obviously, very easy to get started with contributing on projects and that sort of thing. If you use OCaml as a user and you have libraries that you consume, you probably have some opinions about why those libraries are bad, or why they're like they're flawed in some sense, like go and fix it. Like if you're opinionated about like mistakes, go and have an argument with someone. Have an argument with me, and we can like discuss what like different benefits of Alcatest API decisions and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Like that's an in for various people, whereas other people just want a more like a more structured environment, and I totally respect that.
For sure. That's good. That's a good buy for sure. Depending on kind of people. That's a good one. So yeah, I think I bashed like many more questions I thought that I would give to you. So if you have any question, like that's kind of like sort of like interview moment where like if you have any question before we fire you.
It's a good one.
I'm not sure I have any questions.
Right. Perfect. So yeah, I think we just crossed 8 in Spain at least. So yeah, we have yeah, I've been aggressive. So yeah, thanks for your time, Craig. I think we love your blog, or at least I love your blog, and of course every time you teach everybody, and any contribution with Mirage, I think it would change. It would mar kind of thing if we all believe like OCaml is gonna grow, and we are here kind of like deeply knowing that. So we are thankful for that. So.
Yeah, keep the faith.
Keep the faith. So yeah.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, that was pretty fantastic. Yeah. Thank you. That was very, very good. Right, I love the show. Okay, I don't have more time for other questions because I already extrapolated the time. But thank you. That was fantastic. Like, and see everyone. Will be posting the video soon to YouTube, so you can watch it over, or you can watch on Twitch, etc. That's it. Goodbye, everyone, and see you the next one.
See you guys.
Bye.